August 23, 1943. 18,000 feet above the Baltic Sea. The sky is a cold sheet of ink, broken only by the shivering lights of a bomber stream stretching from horizon to horizon. The engines of Avro Lancasters and Handley Halifaxes drone like a rolling thunderstorm, their exhausts glowing dull red in the thin, freezing air. Frost collects on the inside of the cockpits, and each breath clouds into vapor before being sucked toward the fuselage seams by the rushing slipstream. In Lancaster DV183, Flight Lieutenant Arthur McAllister leans forward in his seat, eyes fixed on the dim red glow of his altimeter. He has flown this route before, but never with so many aircraft, never with so much weight, never toward a city that had been declared impossible to reach. Berlin. Below the bomb bay doors sits nearly 6,000 pounds of high explosives and thousands of incendiaries, packed tightly, trembling with each vibration from the Merlin engines. Mac shifts slightly, adjusting the oxygen mask biting into his cheeks. "Navigator," he says over the intercom, voice muffled. "How are we tracking?" From his tiny, lamplit table in the belly of the bomber, Warrant Officer Henry Clark reads off coordinates. Bang on the leader's course. Winds are lighter than forecast. If Jerry doesn't show, we'll be early. Mac grunts. Jerry will show. He remembers the radio broadcasts. Everyone does. Hermann Göring, Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe, promising, swearing, that no Allied aircraft would ever bomb Berlin. Not one. Not a single bomb. Berlin would never know fear. Tonight, that lie is about to burn. Far ahead of the bomber stream, Pathfinder Mosquitos slip through the darkness at high speed, their sleek wooden bodies almost invisible against the night. In one of them, Flying Officer Graham Wild checks the luminous dots of Berlin's defenses flickering faintly on the horizon long before the city itself becomes visible. The glow isn't from lights. It's from fires, the aftershocks of raids from earlier in the week, still smoldering, still choking the air. Berlin has already been hit, but not like this. Not by 700 aircraft slicing into German airspace as if Göring's promise was nothing but smoke. Wild toggles his bomb bay switch. His plane carries target indicators, canisters packed with flares designed to mark Berlin for the incoming heavies. He drops his nose slightly, aiming for the center of the sprawling black shape ahead. Berlin in 15, he radios back to Bomber Command. Back in DV183, the crew waits as the minutes stretch like wire pulled to snapping. Beneath the clouds, Berlin sleeps uneasily. Searchlight crews stand ready beside their metal towers. Anti-aircraft batteries, flak 88s, their barrels pointed skyward, wait for the first echo of engines. Civilians lie awake in apartments already scarred from raids, wondering if tonight will bring another distant rumble or the sound that means everything, the rising wail of the air raid sirens. The sirens have not yet begun. "Skipper," the bomb aimer calls from the nose of the Lancaster. "I've got the first TI flare." "Red?" "No, mixed reds and greens." Pathfinders are on target. Max stares into the distant murk. And there it is, a faint downward blossom of fire, a petal of glowing magnesium drifting toward the earth. "There's Berlin," he murmurs. The city is still dark, its lights extinguished by blackout orders, but the glowing flares outline the shapes of buildings, rail yards, roads, and canals like a ghost map. Then the first searchlight snaps on. A white spear of brilliance cuts upward, sweeping, hunting. More ignite. Dozens. Then hundreds. They reach upward like the fingers of a giant trying to claw aircraft from the sky. "Hold steady," Max says. "We're going in." The first flak bursts erupt far below, black puffs that flash orange at their centers. They rise, too slowly at first, then with frightening accuracy, as German gunners calibrate altitude, speed, and wind. Every bomber crew in the stream feels the shift. The calm is over. "Jesus," mutters Clark, peering through his tiny astrodome. They're really waking up. But Berlin's defenders have a problem. There are too many bombers. The sky is too crowded, too chaotic. The Luftwaffe's night fighter control system, Himmelbett, has been overloaded deliberately by the RAF. Deception streams of mosquitoes pull fighters away. Countermeasures jam radio frequencies. The defenders are stretched thin. Göring's boast, that Berlin was safe, untouchable, has never felt more hollow. When Berlin's sirens finally howl, it is already too late. On the ground, civilians spill into streets illuminated by the pulse of red emergency lights. Children clutch blankets. Women drag baskets of belongings. Men guide the elderly toward bunkers dug beneath offices, Innsbrucker Strasse apartments, school basements. Dogs bark wildly, frightened by the tremors from the incoming bomber stream. In the city's flak towers, massive concrete behemoths, the crews scramble to load ammunition belts. Officers bark coordinates. Radars sweep frantically, overwhelmed by echoes. And in the government district, officials whisper in anger and disbelief. Göring promised. Göring swore. Yet here they come. Bomb doors open, Mac orders. A mechanical whine fills the fuselage as DV183's bomb bay yawns open. Cold air slams upward. The bomber shutters, suddenly less stable. Below them, the first wave has arrived. The incendiaries fall like a metallic rainstorm, tens of thousands of them, tumbling, spinning, igniting as they descend. From 18,000 feet, the impact points look like sparks on a grinding wheel, each one exploding into a fireball that blossoms across the rooftops. Berlin lights up. Flames jump from building to building. Entire blocks are illuminated like daylight. The infrared glow of fires climbing through attics and rafters pulses with terrifying beauty. It's bloody everywhere, whispers the wireless operator. But there's no time to stare. Steady, the bomb aimer says. Left a bit, hold it. Mac locks his jaw, fighting the turbulence from rising hot air and flak bursts punching holes into the sky around them. Bombs away. The Lancaster lurches upward as its payload drops. The sudden lightness feels unnatural, like the bottom falling out of a dream. Through the open bay, the bombs fall, 4,000-pound cookies, clusters of incendiaries, and join the torrent already descending toward the blazing capital. Seconds later, the shockwaves rise to meet them. A column of fire punches upward as a munitions depot detonates. Another follows when a block of factory buildings disappears in a single, rolling explosion. The shockwave slams the Lancaster hard enough to rattle teeth. Jesus Christ, someone blurts. Close bomb doors. Mac shouts. He pulls the aircraft into a shallow bank, trying to escape the worst of the rising heat and debris. His goggles vibrate against his face. The altimeter spins wildly for a moment before stabilizing. Behind them, the rest of the bomber stream roars in, wave after wave, each adding more destruction to the inferno swallowing the city. This is no surgical strike. This is an avalanche of fire. In Berlin, the fire brigades cannot keep up. Water mains burst under collapsing rubble. Streets crack open. Firestorms, true, roaring firestorms, begin to form as superheated air sucks oxygen through alleyways like a hurricane. Flames whirl into columns dozens of meters high. Men and women flee between collapsing buildings, their shadows flapping wildly in the glow. In the Tiergarten, embers drift down like snow. The Reich Chancellery trembles from distant impacts. And Berliners, those who survived the night, will later say the sky didn't look real. It looked like a furnace door opening onto another world. High above, Max steadies the Lancaster as it claws its way back into the darkness. Navigator, he says, voice hoarse. Set course for home. Behind him, Clark turns a page on his chart table. Course 247. We'll be over the North Sea in 2 hours. The bomber's tail gunner speaks softly from the rear turret. Skipper, you should see it. The whole city's on fire. But Mac doesn't look back. He doesn't need to. He can feel the fires from here. He can feel the heat rising through the clouds. He can feel, even without seeing it, the truth unfolding below. Göring's promise has finally shattered, and tonight, Berlin burns. August 23, 1943. Berlin. Minutes past midnight. Smoke curls through the underground corridors of the Zoo Flak Tower, carrying the sting of burning wood and acrid chemicals. The massive concrete walls, 8 feet thick in some places, vibrate with every distant detonation. Inside, beneath humming fluorescent lights, Luftwaffe officers cluster around a plotting table littered with grease pencils, radar prints, and half-drunk cups of ersatz coffee. At the center stands Major Karl-Heinz Bombach, his headset pressed tight against his ear as radio chatter crackles with panic. Night Fighter Grupp reporting scattered contact, negative control, repeat, no control. Bombach slams a fist into the table. They're jamming us again. Englanders must be flooding the bands. He doesn't say the other truth out loud. There are too many bombers for any organized intercept. On the tower's upper levels, gunners load belt after belt into the massive 128mm flak 40s, the largest anti-aircraft guns ever used in Berlin's defenses. The barrels glow red at the tips. The recoil thunders through the tower like distant artillery. But even these titans struggle to reach the bomber stream at 18,000 feet, and when they do, the shells burst far wide of their targets. The bombers don't fly in neat formations. They crawl through the sky as a chaotic, shifting tide, impossible to pin down. Bombach stares at the tracking board. He knows exactly what Göring promised in front of the Reichstag microphones. Every officer here knows it. They heard him boast with absolute confidence. If enemy bombers ever reach Berlin, you may call me Meyer. Now the sky above Germany's capital is filled with British aircraft. Hundreds of them. More than any one night fighter wing could ever hope to repel. Bombach exhales shakily and mutters, "You made promises your air force cannot keep, Reichsmarschall." The lights flicker as a shockwave rattles the tower. Across Berlin, the fires multiply. In the district of Schöneberg, a tram car glows cherry red from the heat. Glass warps and drips from window frames. Firefighters in leather coats sprint through alleys carrying hoses that sputter weak water pressure. The roar of flames drowns out their shouted commands. On Bülowstrasse, Nurse Liesel Fritschie shields a young girl beneath the overhang of a railway arch as embers rain down like sparks from a forge. The air trembles with each detonation, windows rippling before shattering into clouds of razor-edged fragments. She presses a cloth over the girl's mouth. "Stay low. Don't breathe too deep." The girl nods weakly, coughing. Liesel looks upward. Through gaps between buildings, she can see the silhouettes of massive aircraft sliding across the glowing sky. Their engines throb like heartbeat drums. And behind them, the sky blooms with fresh explosions. High above the inferno, the bomber crews feel the night fighting back. "Fighter! Starboard high!" The tail gunner shouts from DV183, voice sharp with adrenaline. Mac jerks his head, scanning the blackness. A shape streaks down from above, sleek, fast, glinting in the fire's reflection. A Bf-110G4, bristling with aerials from its radar and armed with upward-firing Schrage music cannons. The hunter dives out of the darkness. "Skipper, he's coming in hot," the mid-upper gunner yells. Tracer fire rips past the Lancaster's tail, thin golden lances cutting the sky. The German night fighter overshoots, banking sharply to line up again. Mac forces the Lancaster into a shallow corkscrew maneuver. The wings groan under the strain. The crew clutches at their stations as centrifugal force pins them to their seats. Hold it, he's rolling in again," the rear gunner warns. Another streak of tracers. This time, the mid-upper gunner fires back. The Lancaster shudders as its .303 Brownings hammer into the night. The Bf-110 flashes briefly in the gun sight, then veers away as one engine sputters. "He's buggering off," the gunner cheers. But Mac does not relax. "There'll be more." Keep your eyes open. There always were more. Tonight, Berlin's burning glow makes every bomber's silhouette painfully visible. Inside the Reich Air Ministry, a different battle unfolds. Hermann Göring strides through the marble hall in a rage, his ornate uniform glittering in the flashing light from the fires outside. Officers scramble to keep pace as he storms into the operations chamber. "Why am I hearing reports that hundreds of bombers are over the capital?" he roars. A young radar officer snaps to attention. Herr Reichsmarschall, the British approached from the north, low level at first, then climbing. Our stations reported jamming across. "I don't want excuses." Göring thunders, striking the table so hard that ink pots topple. "Where are the night fighters? Where is Kamhuber? Why are these vermin allowed to roam above our city?" "Sir," another officer tries, "the Himmelbett sectors are overwhelmed. They can't guide the fighters reliably. The jamming is—" Göring cuts him off with a glare so cold it freezes the room. He does not admit it aloud. He never will. But inside, something festers. He knows the truth. Berlin was never untouchable. And tonight, every Berliner knows it too. Back in the inferno, the bombing reaches its zenith. Another RAF wave sweeps in from the west. Lancasters release their incendiaries over Mobit, turning the district into a sea of flames. Halifaxes strike Simonstadt, detonating warehouses and machinery plants. Explosions thrum through the earth like the pulse of a dying giant. In the Tiergarten, centuries-old trees burst into cinders, their sap boiling within the bark until trunks split apart with explosive cracks. The animals in the Berlin Zoo howl in terror. Elephants trumpet wildly, pressing against the far edges of their enclosures as firestorms swirl nearby. Keepers struggle to calm them as the sky pulses red and orange. On the streets, civilians cover their ears and scream for shelter as incendiaries hit rooftops with metallic clangs. Some extinguish quickly. Others ignite instantly, white-hot magnesium flares that sear through attics and stairwells. Entire neighborhoods begin to collapse inward. In DV183, Mac's crew watches the devastation shrink behind them. Clark, the navigator, whispers, "I've never seen flames like that. It's like watching a city melt." The wireless operator adds softly, "Göring said this would never happen. He said no bomber would ever reach Berlin." Mac doesn't answer for a long moment. He simply stares into the darkness ahead, the fires reflecting dimly on his goggles. Finally, he says quietly, "Well, we just dropped 50,000 reasons he was wrong." The crew falls silent. In the ruins of Berlin, as the bombers slip away into the night, the true horror becomes clear. Fresh fires merge with older ones, feeding one another until the entire city center glows like a vast, heaving furnace. Firefighters collapse from exhaustion. Civilians stumble through the haze, their faces gray with ash. Some wander without direction, dazed by concussion blasts. And everywhere, there is heat. Walls crumble. Streets buckle. Tram lines twist like molten wires. The people of Berlin look skyward, not with hatred, not with anger, but with something far worse. Betrayal. They had been told the city was safe. They had been told the Luftwaffe ruled the skies. But tonight, Berliners learned the truth, lit by the glow of burning rooftops. Their shield was made of paper. August 24, 1943. 1:07 a.m. Berlin. Heat ripples through the streets like a living creature. The once cool night has turned into a suffocating furnace, the air thick with soot and the bitter tang of burning chemicals. Flames roar between buildings in Charlottenburg, leaping across courtyards with unnatural speed as the firestorm begins to breathe, drawing in oxygen with a hollow, monstrous howl. In a basement shelter beneath Kaiser Friedrichstrasse, dozens of civilians press together in the darkness. Dust trickles from the ceiling with each distant explosion. A railway worker named Fritz Halley, his face streaked with sweat and ash, grips the hand of his wife, Marta. Her breathing is fast and shallow. "It'll pass soon," he whispers. Though he knows the raid is still at its height, the ground still trembling. A child begins to cry. Someone hisses, "Quiet, for God's sake." But the child can't stop. Neither can Marta. The air inside the shelter grows hotter, stifling, unbreathable. Fritz wipes sweat from his brow, realizing something horrible. The fire is growing outside. It's consuming the oxygen. He presses his ear to the metal door leading to the stairwell. It's hot. Too hot. Fritz stiffens. "We have to leave," he says. "Now." A few faces turn to him in disbelief. "Are you mad?" an old man hisses. "Out there? Into the bombs." Fritz pulls the door handle, and it burns his hand. "The firestorm's coming this way," he says, voice shaking. "If we stay, we suffocate." The murmuring stops. Everyone knows he's right. They have seconds, not minutes, to move. Above ground, burning debris drifts down like glowing feathers. Roof tiles detonate from intense heat, firing shards across the streets. Whole blocks are collapsing inward as flames hollow them out from within. Those already outside cling to walls to avoid being pulled toward the firestorm's core, its monstrous suction drawing air, smoke, and debris with terrifying force. In Nollendorfplatz, a fire truck is physically dragged sideways as the storm builds, its tires screeching across cobblestones until it crashes against a lamppost. Inside the cab, firefighter Hans Riedel shouts to his men. "Out now!" They scramble clear just before a whirlwind of fire swallows the truck whole, flames wrapping around it like serpents. Hans shields his face as another blast erupts down the street. He cannot tell if it's a bomb or a building collapsing. Meanwhile, the Pathfinders circle back. In one of the Mosquitos, flying Officer Graham Wild peers through the canopy at the titanic fires now engulfing the city center. His stomach tightens. "It's a bloody volcano," his navigator mutters. Wild nods slowly. Marker flares on target. They won't need any more help. Yet they stay for another pass, risking night fighters, because protocol demands confirmation. The fires are spreading too quickly, merging into a continuous wall of flames stretching miles. He switches to the radio. "Master bomber to incoming groups. TI's steady on main concentration, visibility excellent. Continue marking pattern. Berlin is burning well." There is no triumph in his voice, just grim duty. He banks the Mosquito away, the aircraft rocking in the heated turbulence pouring upward from the firestorm. In DV183, Mac and the crew are now nearing the Danish coastline. The bomber hums with a weary rhythm, the Merlin engines steady after hours of strain. The cold air outside chills the fuselage, frost forming again on the windows. But inside, the crew is silent. Clark, the navigator, checks his charts but keeps glancing over his shoulder, as if still watching Berlin's glow rising behind them. The wireless operator speaks first. "Skipper, you think any of them made it out?" His voice is soft, uneasy. Mac doesn't answer immediately. The truth hesitates on his tongue. "They had shelters," the engineer offers hopefully. "Shelters don't stop firestorms," Clark says quietly. Mac grips the control column tighter. He can still see the moment the bombs left the bay. Still feel the shock waves chasing them upward. He knows exactly what their payload, and the payloads of hundreds more, has done. Yet he also remembers Coventry, London, Plymouth, Bristol, cities burned long before Berlin. And he remembers the RAF motto Clark once scratched into the mess hall wall at Scampton. "They sowed the wind." Mac completes it silently. And now they reap the whirlwind. Back in Berlin, the whirlwind deepens. Fritz leads the shelter group up the sweltering stairwell. As they push against the exit door, a wave of heat slams into them. The air outside roars, not like wind, not like fire, but like a combination of both, a sucking, hungry force. "Stay low," he shouts. They drop to hands and knees, crawling into the open as flames leap across rooftops. Sparks pepper their clothes. The sky glows red and orange, brighter than dawn. A burning timber crashes behind them, scattering embers. Someone screams. Fritz scans frantically. Head toward the river. It's the only chance. We follow the Leah. They move as one, stumbling over rubble, dodging falling debris. The heat on their backs grows fiercer by the second. Inside the zoo flak tower, Major Bomback watches the disaster unfold from a narrow observation slit. Even with thick glass shielding the opening, the heat is palpable. An adjutant approaches. Sir, the fire brigades request permission to use tower reservoirs. Bomback exhales slowly. The flak tower's water supply is meant for its guns, its crew, and, if needed, its civilian shelter. But he has already seen the inferno outside. He has seen the streets glowing like molten metal. He nods. Give them whatever they need. The adjutant salutes and runs to relay orders. Bomback turns back to the burning city. Göring's promise echoes in his mind. No enemy bomber will ever drop a bomb on Berlin. He shuts his eyes. Call me Meyer. He whispers. Tonight we all are. As Berlin burns, the bomber stream continues its long flight home. Over the North Sea, Mac listens to the routine radio check-ins. Aircraft damaged. Aircraft safe. Aircraft missing. He finds himself waiting for the missing ones. They always come. A Halifax sends a last frantic transmission, engine fire, ditching. A Lancaster reports hydraulic failure. Another calls for an escort, night fighter damage, limping home slow. Mac absorbs the reports with a cold, heavy weight in his chest. War always collects its price. Tonight, Berlin pays hers. And so do the men who came to light the fires. Back in the city, Fritz and Marta reach the riverbank with the others. They collapse beside the water, panting, drenched in sweat. Behind them, flames roar through streets they narrowly escaped. The firestorm claws upward, its core twisting like a column of pure heat. Fritz clutches Marta's hand and pulls her close. Above them, the sky is still burning. August 24, 1943. 3:42 a.m. Berlin. The fires burn through the night, but the worst of the bombardment has passed. Now the city groans under the weight of collapsing roofs and buckling walls. Flames leap and fall like shifting curtains, revealing brief glimpses of shattered rooms and gutted stairwells before swallowing them again. On the banks of the Spree, Fritz and Marta Holly lie curled together, gasping for cool air. Ash drifts around them like gray snow. The river reflects the blazing glow, rippling with orange and red like molten glass. Marta lifts her head weakly. Is it over? Fritz scans the horizon. The fires still roar. Embers still whirl. The ground still shakes from distant explosions where munition stores detonate from the heat. But the sky, though still pulsing red, is no longer filled with the drone of engines. They're gone, he says softly. I think the bombers are gone. Behind them, others from the shelter collapse near the water. Some weep. Some simply stare, hollow-eyed, watching their city disintegrate. Fritz turns to help an older woman sit down. Her hands tremble violently. It's all right, he murmurs. You're safe now. But even he doesn't believe the words. A few blocks away, firefighters battle a blaze that has consumed half of Kurfürstendamm. The hoses sputter weakly, pressure failing as water mains crack apart beneath the heat. Captain Hans Riedel wipes sweat and soot from his brow. His leather coat smolders at the edges. Captain, a young firefighter shouts, pointing upward. Above them, a telephone pole twists, glowing red-hot. Moments later it snaps, collapsing across the street with a shower of sparks. Hans curses. Fall back. That block's gone, let it burn. His men hesitate. Someone to push forward anyway, desperate to save what little remains. But Hans grabs one by the arm. Listen to me. You fight that and you die. Pull back. Reluctantly, they retreat into the churning smoke, dragging their hoses with them. Berlin's fire brigades trained for ordinary fires. Factories, warehouses, even the heavy raids of 1940 and 41. But nothing prepares them for a firestorm. Nothing prepares anyone for this. Far across Germany, at 10,000 feet over the North Sea, the faint pink glow of dawn begins to creep over the eastern horizon. DV183 and the surviving bombers continue westward, their engines rumbling with the fatigue of a long, punishing flight. In the Lancaster's cockpit, Mac rubs the bridge of his nose under his oxygen mask. His eyes burn from hours of staring into darkness and flame. "Skipper," Clark says, leaning forward from his station. "Coastal Command reports weather's clear over Lincolnshire. We'll have no trouble putting down." "Good," Mac replies, but his voice lacks the relief the words should carry. Behind him, the mid-upper gunner murmurs, "Feels strange, like we're flying away from the end of the world." No one disagrees. The crew grows quiet again. The adrenaline has faded. What remains is exhaustion and the lingering weight of what they left behind. Beneath them, the sea glitters faintly with the first light of morning. Mac forces himself to focus. "Keep sharp," he says. "Last thing we need is flak ships or some stray night fighter with a death wish." Yet even he can't help glancing back through the cockpit glass. Berlin is far behind them now, too far to see. But the memory of the fires lingers like an afterimage burned into his vision. Back in Berlin, the sky begins to lighten. Dawn does not bring relief. It brings revelation. The firestorm weakens as the cooler morning air pushes in. Flames dwindle from towering columns to angry flickers. Smoke rolls across the city like a suffocating fog. As the firestorm collapses, the survivors emerge. From cellars, from half-ruined bunkers, from shattered train stations, they step into streets transformed beyond recognition. Fritz helps Marta to her feet. They climb a small embankment near the river to get their bearings. Then they see it. Whole districts, Schönberg, Charlottenburg, Mobit, gone. Not damaged, not scarred, erased. Blocks that once held apartments, bakeries, cinemas, tram stops, all reduced to rubble, twisted metal, and smoldering beams. Marta lifts a trembling hand to her mouth. "Oh, God." Fritz swallows hard. We should find the others. See who made it." They begin walking, stepping over debris still hot enough to scorch boots. A woman calls out from a collapsed doorway. A man limps toward the river, clutching his arm. Dogs wander aimlessly through the ruins, whining. A group of firefighters pushes a wagon carrying injured civilians, many moaning softly under blankets. The city groans with the sound of the wounded, of the lost, of thousands burned alive in the firestorm. In the zoo flak tower, Major Bombach surveys his instruments. Many radar screens show nothing but static interference. Communications with several outlying batteries have been lost entirely. An adjutant approaches hesitantly. "Sir, casualties reports are coming in. The preliminary numbers are high." Bombach doesn't ask for the exact figures. He knows they will change. Rise. Rise again. He simply nods. "Send rescue teams. Every man we can spare." The adjutant leaves. Bombach looks toward the scorched landscape outside. The fires still glow through the drifting smoke. He thinks of Göring's boast, so loud, so theatrical. He thinks of the hundreds of bombers that proved him wrong in a single night. The Luftwaffe was once the terror of Europe. Now it cannot even defend its own capital. Bombach grips the edge of the plotting table until his knuckles whiten. "God help us," he murmurs. "This war is turning." At RAF Scampton, the returning Lancasters descend one by one, battered, scorched, but alive. Ground crews rush out as wheels touch down on the dew-covered runways. DV183 lands heavily, bouncing once before settling. Mac taxis to dispersal, cuts the engines, and finally, slowly, removes his oxygen mask. The sudden rush of cool, fresh air feels unreal. The crew climbs out, stiff-legged, blinking in the pale light. Engineers and riggers approach with clipboards and fuel hoses. Someone hands Mac a mug of hot tea that he accepts with both hands. But he barely tastes it. Voices echo across the tarmac. Lancaster down in the channel. Halifax diverted to Coltishall. Badly shot up. No word from the crew of KX-908. More bombers appear overhead. Some limp in with holes in their wings. One lands with its rear turret missing. Another rolls to a stop, trailing smoke. The cost becomes clear. Every fire in Berlin had a corresponding loss in the air. Mac closes his eyes, listening to the engines cooling, ticking softly like metal sighs. He knows the war is far from over. He knows Berlin will be hit again, and again, and again. But he also knows what last night means. Not just for the RAF. For the world. For the first time, the myth of Nazi invincibility has been burned away, lit by 50,000 bombs in a single night. And nothing will ever be the same again. August 24, 1943. Late morning. Berlin. The sun rises higher, its pale light struggling to penetrate the haze drifting over the city. Smoke hangs in a vast dome over Berlin, thick enough to dim the daylight and blur the skyline into a ragged silhouette. The air tastes of soot, metal, and something else, an odor that clings to the back of the throat and stings the eyes. Fritz Holly helps Marta down a slope of broken masonry where a 3-story apartment block once stood. Dust puffs under their boots. The exposed foundations below resemble an open grave. A neighbor, her capel, stumbles toward them, his shirt torn, his face streaked with grime. He had lived 2 doors down from them. "Your building," he croaks, pointing weakly south. "It's gone, Fritz." "I'm sorry." Fritz doesn't answer. He already knew. Marta grips his arm tightly. She cannot bring herself to look. They continue onward, navigating streets transformed into labyrinths of debris. Every landmark they use to orient themselves, every bakery, every tram stop, every row of familiar windows, has vanished, replaced by jagged outlines and piles of steaming rubble. A group of Red Cross volunteers tend to a cluster of wounded civilians. One man sits shirtless as a medic wraps his burned torso in gauze, the fabric sticking to blistered skin. Another woman kneels over a small body beneath a blanket, whispering prayers through trembling lips. And everywhere, Berliners sift silently through ruins, searching for family, for documents, for anything not burned. Some search for bodies. Some search for hope. Most find neither. At Tempelhof Airport, the mood is no less grim. A row of staff cars sits outside the operations hall. Inside, Luftwaffe officers stand stiffly at attention as Hermann Göring enters with measured steps. His uniform, once immaculate, now bears the smell of smoke, and his eyes are shadowed with exhaustion and fury. No one dares speak first. Göring walks past the map of Germany pinned to the wall, past the charts showing bomber routes, past the reports detailing the failure of radar sectors and the chaos of the night fighter response. He stops at the head of the table. "This," he says, voice low and dangerous, "should never have happened." Silence thickens. The chief of operations clears his throat. Reichsmarschall, the RAF approached with deceptive streams. Their tactics have evolved. The jamming. "Spare me," Göring snaps. "I am not interested in excuses. I am interested in solutions." Another officer steps forward. "We must rebuild the air defenses, sir. Shift more fighter wings east. Reinforce the flak towers. Improve radar detection." Göring's eyes blaze. "Reinforce? Improve? Are you children? Berlin burned last night. Burned while our fighters chased phantoms across the coast." No one meets his gaze. He slams a fist onto the table. "I will not tolerate another night like this. Do you understand?" "Yes, Herr Reichsmarschall," they answer in unison. But Göring hears the doubt behind the words. He knows the truth. The Reich's shield is cracking, and the enemy has learned how to slip through the breaks. Back in England, DV-183's crew gathers in the debriefing hut, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the scribble of pencils on clipboards. A pot of strong tea sits on the table, mostly ignored. A young intelligence officer, barely 20, flips through his notes. You observed fires spreading rapidly in the southwest districts? Clark nods tiredly. Firestorm conditions. Worst I've seen. And the defenses? Flak heavy at the start, Mac says, but uncoordinated. Fighters scattered. They tried to pick us off but couldn't manage a proper intercept. The officer nods, jotting down details. Anything else to report? Mac hesitates. He thinks of Berlin glowing beneath the bomber stream like a lake of fire. He thinks of the blast that nearly rolled DV183 onto her side. He thinks of the smoke that rose so high it brushed the underbellies of aircraft. And he thinks of the people, women, children, who lived in those streets. He exhales slowly. No, nothing else. The officer dismisses them, and the crew shuffles out into the cool morning air. The smell of grass and damp soil feels strange after hours of smoke and burning. The tail gunner says quietly, "We did what we had to do." Mac doesn't respond. He simply watches another Lancaster taxi across the field, its fuselage so riddled with flak holes that sunlight shines through sections of the skin. War demands conviction. But conviction doesn't silence the echoes of burning cities. Berlin, early afternoon. The fires no longer rage, they simmer, hiss, and spit as crews move through the streets extinguishing what remains. Smoke pours from thousands of smoldering timbers. Fritz and Marta finally reach what was once their apartment block. The sight steals the breath from both of them. Only fragments remain. A portion of a wall, a warped iron railing from the staircase, the burnt frame of a piano from the neighbor's flat. A child's metal toy car sits half-melted atop a mound of ash. Marta kneels, touching the foundation stones that were once their home. Fritz crouches beside her. "We're alive," he whispers. "That's what matters." Marta nods, but tears fall silently onto the rubble. Around them, neighbors wander in shock. A man sifts through charred wood, pulling out a twisted wedding ring. A woman collapses beside a burned cradle, her cries echoing through the ruins. Fritz puts an arm around Marta, holding her close. This was the night Berlin learned how fragile walls and promises truly are. In the government district, smoke still clings to the facades of the ministries. Soldiers shovel debris from the steps. A few kilometers away, the Tiergarten smolders, its ancient trees reduced to blackened husks. Bombach exits the zoo flak tower for the first time since the raid began. The ground crunches under his boots. He wipes sweat and soot from his brow as he surveys the destruction with haunted eyes. Never in his years of service had he imagined Berlin, his city, would see this. Göring's bombast now feels like a cruel joke. The Luftwaffe, once feared and formidable, had failed to protect even the heart of the Reich. And Bombach knows something else. This was not the last time bombers would come. It was only the beginning. At RAF Scampton, Mac walks alone along the flight line. The cool wind tugs at his coat. Behind him, mechanics work on battered aircraft, readying them for the next mission. He stops beside DV183. The paint is scorched along the fuselage. A chunk of rudder fabric is missing. Oil streaks mar the underside of the starboard wing. But she survived. He rests a hand on the metal skin. Berlin, 500 miles away, burns because of this machine and the men who flew her. He looks up at the cloudless sky. There will be more missions. There will be more nights like last night. There will be more firestorms. The war is changing, growing darker, more total, more merciless, and they are all caught in the storm. But for now, for this moment, Mac allows himself a single shaking breath of calm. He whispers, "Let's hope it ends sooner than it began." Berlin begins the slow process of counting its dead. The RAF begins preparing its next sortie. Europe holds its breath. And the myth that the Reich could never be touched, never be harmed, lies buried beneath the smoking ruins of its own capital. 50,000 bombs fell in one night, and the world would never be the same again.